Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today we're diving deep into a major overnight escalation in the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine. The events of the past 24 hours have been some of the most intense we've seen in recent weeks, and they underline how the conflict continues to evolve into an increasingly drone-driven, high-tech battle of attrition. Russia launched a staggering 580 drones and 40 missiles against Ukraine in a single night, an attack on a scale that has drawn global attention. At the same time, Ukraine struck back, targeting Russian oil refineries in the Saratov and Samara regions, showing that Kyiv is not only on the defensive but also trying to cripple Russia's war economy. And to add to this already tense picture, President Volodymyr Zelenskiy made a public appeal, saying Ukraine urgently needs more drones to counter these massive Russian assaults. Let's break this down carefully, because there's a lot happening here. First, the sheer number of drones, 580 in one wave, is unprecedented in this war. Russia has been using drones extensively for more than a year now, particularly Iranian-supplied Shahed drones, which they've adapted for long-range attacks. These drones are relatively cheap compared to missiles, and Russia has been producing more of them domestically too. Launching 580 drones in one night is not only a military strike, it's also a psychological tactic. Imagine being in Ukraine and hearing air raid sirens blaring for hours, waves upon waves of drones buzzing overhead, some getting shot down, some making it through to hit power infrastructure, residential areas, or logistics hubs. Even if Ukrainian air defenses are highly effective and shoot down the majority, the stress, the exhaustion, and the strain on resources are enormous. Along with the drones, Russia also fired about 40 missiles. Missiles are more expensive, more destructive per unit, and often harder to intercept. A combined drone-missile barrage like this forces Ukraine to spread out its air defenses. If you use a surface-to-air missile to shoot down a relatively cheap drone, you're expending valuable and costly resources on a low-cost target. But if you ignore the drones, they can still cause damage to infrastructure, start fires, and terrorize the civilian population. This is the saturation strategy, overwhelm defenses by throwing so many things at once that something is bound to get through. Now, Ukraine has built one of the most sophisticated air defense systems in the world over the past 2 years, thanks to Western support and its own ingenuity. They have Patriot missile batteries from the United States, NASAMS systems, German IRIS-T systems, and even old Soviet-era S-300s still in use. But the sheer volume of attacks means that defending every city and every power station is close to impossible. And this brings us to President Zelenskyy's point: Ukraine urgently needs more drones. Not just for offensive operations, but also for defense. Defensive drones, surveillance drones, and even drone swarms that can intercept incoming targets are becoming part of the new reality of modern warfare. On the other side of this equation, Ukraine's strike on Russian oil refineries is also hugely significant. Overnight, Ukrainian forces targeted facilities in Saratov and Samara, regions deep inside Russia. These are hundreds of kilometers from the front line, which means Ukraine is deploying long-range drones and missiles of its own, often domestically developed, sometimes with Western assistance. Oil refineries are a particularly strategic target because Russia depends heavily on oil exports to fund its war effort. Every time Ukraine hits an oil facility, it disrupts production, causes economic damage, and sends a signal that Russia's heartland is not safe. Fires at refineries are not only economically painful but also symbolically important. They show ordinary Russians that the war is not just happening in far-off occupied territories, it's coming home. This back-and-forth dynamic illustrates how both countries are leaning heavily into drone warfare. For Russia, drones are a cost-effective way to maintain pressure on Ukraine. For Ukraine, drones are a way to strike back across borders without risking piloted aircraft or relying solely on limited missile stockpiles. And both sides are racing to produce more, better, and smarter drones. Now, let's pause here and talk about the human side. These numbers, 580 drones, 40 missiles, sound almost abstract, but what does it mean for ordinary people in Ukraine? It means sleepless nights in basements or metro stations, constant fear, and the destruction of homes, schools, hospitals, and power plants. The Ukrainian power grid has been a constant target, with Russia hoping to break civilian morale by turning off the lights and heat. Each attack forces Ukraine to spend enormous amounts of money repairing infrastructure, while humanitarian agencies struggle to keep people safe and warm. For families with children, elderly relatives, or people with disabilities, the psychological toll is immense. On the Russian side, Ordinary people near refineries and industrial targets are starting to feel the war, too, hearing explosions and seeing fires in their own regions. From a military standpoint, these latest strikes are a test of endurance. Russia has been stockpiling drones and missiles, often ramping up attacks in waves. Launching 580 drones in one night suggests a major stockpile, but also raises questions: how sustainable is this? Can Russia keep up this tempo for weeks or months? Or was this a one-off show of force to mark a particular moment in the war? Likewise, Ukraine's ability to reach deep into Russian territory with strikes shows they're expanding their capabilities, but those weapons are also limited in supply. Each Ukrainian drone that flies hundreds of kilometers into Russia represents months of development and precious resources. President Zelenskyy's comments underline a crucial reality: Ukraine cannot keep up this fight alone. It needs ongoing, large-scale international support, not just in money and weapons but in technology transfer. Drones are relatively cheap compared to fighter jets or tanks, but they need to be produced in the tens of thousands to meet current needs. Ukraine has been trying to build its own drone industry rapidly, and Zelensky has spoken about making Ukraine a hub for drone innovation. But time is critical. Russia is not waiting, and every night of bombardment depletes Ukraine's resources further. Now, let's look at the bigger picture. Why does Russia launch such a massive strike at this point in the war? Part of the answer may be seasonal. As winter approaches, energy infrastructure becomes an even more valuable target. Russia has repeatedly used winter as a weapon, trying to freeze Ukrainians into submission. Another part of the answer may be political. Russia often escalates around key dates, international summits, or domestic milestones. It's a way of signaling strength, both to its own population and to foreign audiences. Showing that it can still inflict massive damage despite Western aid to Ukraine sends a message of resilience. Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil facilities are equally political. They show Western allies that Ukraine is not simply on the defensive, that it can hit back hard. They also aim to pressure Russia economically, making the war more expensive to sustain. Oil revenue is one of the few lifelines keeping the Russian economy afloat amid sanctions. Damage to refineries means less revenue, more domestic strain, and potentially more discontent. We also need to think about the technological evolution here. Warfare has always been shaped by new technology, and this conflict is arguably the first large-scale drone war in history. We've seen drones in Afghanistan, Syria, and Nagorno-Karabakh, but nothing on this scale. Drones are cheap, expendable, and capable of being mass-produced quickly. They can be used for surveillance, precision strikes, or swarming attacks. And because they're relatively low cost, losing hundreds in a night is not catastrophic in the same way losing dozens of fighter jets would be. This has huge implications for the future of warfare beyond Ukraine. Other countries are watching closely, learning lessons, and investing in drone programs of their own. Another layer here is international response. Western governments are already discussing how to increase support for Ukraine's air defense. Countries like Germany, the US, and the UK have pledged more systems and munitions. But there's also the question of scaling up drone production in Ukraine itself. If Ukraine can build enough drones domestically, it can reduce reliance on slow, politically complicated arms deliveries. Zelenskyy's message is not just directed at his own people, it's also aimed squarely at Western audiences, reminding them that Ukraine's fight is not just for its own survival but for broader security in Europe. Of course, Russia frames it differently. Russian state media portrays these massive strikes as punishment for Ukraine's attacks on Russian soil, and as proof of Russian military power. They downplay the damage from Ukrainian strikes, often showing videos of fires quickly put out, or claiming refineries are still functioning normally. But the very fact that Ukraine can hit deep into Russia repeatedly shows cracks in Russia's air defense coverage. It also challenges the Kremlin's narrative that Russia is secure and untouchable. Let's circle back to the people at the center of this. Imagine being a Ukrainian air defense operator on a night like this. You're tracking dozens of targets at once, making split-second decisions about which to shoot, which system to use, and how to prioritize. Every mistake could mean lives lost. Or imagine being a firefighter in Saratov or Samara, called to put out massive oil refinery fires, knowing these are strategic targets that could be hit again at any time. These human stories, often hidden behind the numbers, are what give us the true scale of the tragedy. Now, in terms of military outcomes, what does this mean? For Ukraine, surviving a night like this demonstrates resilience. If they manage to shoot down the majority of those drones and missiles, it's a victory in itself, even if some damage occurred. For Russia, launching such a massive attack may look powerful, but if it fails to achieve lasting damage, it may actually reveal weakness, burning through stockpiles without decisive results. For Ukraine's strikes on refineries, the impact is cumulative. One refinery hit may be repaired, but repeated strikes build up economic pressure over time. There's also the question of escalation. Every time Ukraine strikes deeper into Russia, the risk of retaliation grows. Russia may choose to escalate even further, potentially using more advanced weapons or widening its list of targets. But Ukraine cannot afford to hold back. It needs to show strength both to its allies and its adversary. This balancing act defines the conflict: escalate enough to cause real damage, but not so much that it triggers catastrophic escalation beyond what allies are willing to support. So where does this leave us? The war is grinding on with no clear end in sight. Nights like this, hundreds of drones, dozens of missiles, could become the new normal. Ukraine is pleading for more support, more drones, more air defense systems. Russia is betting that it can outlast Western patience and wear Ukraine down. Both sides are adapting, innovating, and pushing the limits of modern warfare. As observers, we have to recognize the stakes. This isn't just a local conflict. It's shaping the future of warfare, testing the unity of Western alliances, and defining the security order of Europe. Every drone launched, every missile fired, every refinery burning is part of a bigger story about power, resilience, and survival. So to sum up, Russia launched an enormous barrage of 580 drones and 40 missiles against Ukraine overnight, aiming to overwhelm defenses and inflict maximum damage. Ukraine responded by striking oil refineries deep inside Russian territory, showing its own growing capabilities. President Zelensky has renewed his call for more drones, underlining the central role this technology now plays in the war. The humanitarian toll remains staggering, the economic costs immense, and the political stakes sky high. This war is not slowing down, it's evolving, intensifying, and redefining what modern conflict looks like. And that brings us to the end of today's review. If you've been following this conflict closely, you'll know that each week brings new developments, new escalations, and new lessons about resilience and innovation under fire. I'll continue to keep you updated with the latest analysis, breaking down these events in plain language so we can all understand not just what happened, but why it matters. Thank you for watching.